June 14th, 1944, near Saint-Lô, Normandy. The earth shudders again. Not a sharp crack this time, but a deep, rolling concussion that moves through the hedgerow like a living thing. Leaves tremble. Damp soil slides down into Karl Weiss's collar. Somewhere beyond the fields, American artillery keeps firing. Methodical, patient, relentless. Obergefreiter Karl Weiss presses his shoulder harder into the ground, the wood stock of his Kar 98K biting into his palm. The rifle feels wrong today, too heavy, like it belongs to someone else. His fingers are stiff, numb from rain and exhaustion, and when he shifts his grip, mud smears across the bolt. He has not slept properly in 3 nights. The hedgerow stinks of rot and cordite, wet leaves, burnt powder, fear. Weiss breathes through his mouth because the smell makes his stomach churn. An empty stomach. The last thing he ate was a thin slice of bread sometime yesterday morning. Since then, only rainwater collected in his helmet. Around him, the remnants of his platoon are scattered along the hedge. Too few. Far too few. Faces hollow, eyes red, uniforms torn and darkened by dirt. The bocage has turned every meter of ground into a trap, and the Americans are learning fast. Another explosion thumps in the distance. Weiss flinches despite himself. Then it happens. Shouting. Not German. The sound cuts through the artillery like a blade. Loud, confident, close. Weiss's head snaps toward the opposite hedgerow. His heart slams against his ribs as he tries to bring the rifle up. But before he can aim, a figure rises from the greenery across the narrow field. An American infantryman. He steps forward deliberately, boots crunching softly in the grass. His M1 Garand is already shouldered, barrel steady, pointed directly at Weiss. The American's helmet sits low on his brow, shadowing his eyes, but his mouth is open, voice sharp and unmistakable. "Hands up, slowly!" Weiss freezes. For a heartbeat, no one moves. Then, one by one, hands rise along the hedgerow, fingers spread, rifles loosened. A few seconds of hesitation, the kind that decides life or death, and then, metal clinks softly as weapons drop into the grass. The fighting, for them, is over. More Americans emerge from cover, moving with practiced ease. They are young, younger than Weiss expected, some barely old enough to shave. They fan out, rifles ready, eyes alert but not panicked. Weiss stands slowly, hands raised, his legs trembling as he straightens. Pain shoots through his knees. He swallows hard and keeps his eyes forward. They are searched quickly and efficiently. No blows, no shouting. An American soldier pats down Weiss's pockets, removes his helmet, takes his belt. Another tags him with a small paper card, scribbling numbers without looking at his face. Weiss notices details he never expected to see. The Americans' uniforms fit well. Their boots are clean. Their webbing is intact, not patched together with wire and hope. One of them chews something steadily, jaw working in a slow, lazy rhythm. Gum, Weiss realizes. The column forms, a loose line of German prisoners, some wounded and limping, others staring at the ground, ashamed or numb. A few glance up at their captors with resentment. Most simply look tired. The march to the rear begins. It is strangely quiet. No kicks, no curses. When Weiss stumbles over uneven ground, dizziness washing over him, an American sergeant steps forward and grips his arm. "Easy," the man says, steadying him until his balance returns. Then he lets go, as if this is the most natural thing in the world. Trucks wait down the road, canvas covered, engines idling. The prisoners are loaded in without ceremony. The canvas flaps drop, and the world narrows to darkness and diesel fumes as the truck lurches forward. Hours later, Weiss finds himself inside a temporary holding area near the coast. Barbed wire fences, canvas tents, guard towers silhouetted against a grey sky. The invasion is still roaring somewhere beyond the horizon. Aircraft droning overhead, trucks moving endlessly, supplies flowing like a river of steel and fuel. That night, as the artillery fades into a distant rumble, something happens that unsettles Weiss more than the shelling ever did. Dinner arrives. Metal containers are opened. Steam rises into the cool air. Bread is handed out. Meat. Hot soup. Weiss lifts the spoon cautiously, half expecting a trick. The first mouthful stops him cold. The taste is rich, real. He eats slowly at first, then faster, hunger overpowering suspicion. Around him, other prisoners do the same. No one speaks. They exchange looks instead. Confusion, disbelief, something close to fear. This is not how captivity was supposed to begin. And as Weiss scrapes the bottom of the mess tin clean, a question forms quietly in his mind, one that will not let him rest. If this is how the Americans treat prisoners, what must they give their own soldiers?
June 15th to 18th, 1944.
Allied holding area, Normandy coast. Morning comes without ceremony. No shouted insults. No rifle butts striking tent poles. Just the low hum of engines and the distant thud of artillery, steady and unbroken, like the breathing of a giant that never sleeps. Karl Weiss wakes on a thin blanket laid over packed earth. His body aches in places he did not know could ache. When he sits up, the tent flap is already open, and an American guard stands outside, helmet pushed back, clipboard in hand. "Roll call," the guard says, voice flat, almost bored. The prisoners shuffle out into the grey light. Fog hangs low over the camp, softening the sharp lines of barbed wire and tents. Weiss squints toward the coast. Ships sit offshore. More ships than he has ever seen in one place. Landing craft move back and forth like insects, unloading men, vehicles, crates. Everything moves. Nothing seems stuck. They are counted, names taken, ranks noted. No one is rushed, but nothing is delayed. Breakfast follows. Coffee. Not a weak, bitter substitute, but real coffee, dark and steaming. Bread again, something resembling eggs. Weiss wraps his hands around the metal cup, feeling warmth seep into his fingers. He watches the guards as he drinks. None of them seem concerned about shortages. No one checks portions. No one hovers. A younger prisoner, barely 19, whispers from the line beside him. "This must be temporary," the boy says. "They can't keep this up." Weiss does not answer. Later that day, Weiss is assigned to a work detail, moving supplies within the camp perimeter. Wooden crates stamped with American markings pass from truck to ground to storage with mechanical precision. Each crate is labeled. Each label corresponds to a manifest carried by a clerk who checks it off calmly, even as trucks queue behind him. Weiss overhears English words he recognizes now. Scheduled. Replacement. Reserve. Reserve. The word gnaws at him. In the German army, reserve had become a myth by 1944. A word used in briefings, but never seen at the front. Men were sent forward until there were no men left to send. Here, everything suggests excess. That night, rain falls again. Weiss expects misery, cold, hunger, sickness. Instead, Hot soup arrives on time. Blankets are issued to those without. A wounded prisoner is taken to a medical tent and does not return looking worse. On the third day, they are marched to the shore. Transport ships wait, massive and patient. Weiss smells salt and oil. The crossing is rough. The sea tosses the ship like a toy. Weiss retches until his throat burns and his legs shake. Around him, other prisoners cling to railings, faces pale, uniforms streaked with vomit and seawater. American sailors move among them, efficient, indifferent. One offers Weiss a canteen when he nearly collapses. Water, clean and cool. They land in England under low clouds and drizzle. More camps, more paperwork, more waiting. Time blurs into days and then weeks. Weiss loses track of dates until he overhears one of the guards mention July. July. The war does not feel closer to ending. If anything, it feels farther away, swallowed by distance and procedure. Then comes the second ship. This one is different, larger, more stable. The crossing is calmer, longer. Prisoners whisper rumors at night, voices barely audible over the creak of steel and the slap of waves. America, someone says. Weiss scoffs quietly at first. Then he hears it again, and again. Guards speaking among themselves, the word repeated casually, as if it carries no weight at all. America. It sounds unreal. A place from newspapers and speeches. A place the Reich was supposed to fear, and yet somehow defeat. Weeks later, Weiss steps onto American soil. August 1944. Camp Ellis, Illinois. The first thing he notices is the air. It smells clean, not of smoke or rot or cordite, just grass, dust, oil, sun-warmed wood. The camp rises from flat land, fences, watchtowers, rows of wooden barracks painted a dull, practical color. Roads cut clean lines through the compound. Trucks roll along them in steady columns, engines humming. No one yells. No one runs unless they are supposed to. A sign stands near the entrance. Camp Ellis. Guards issue instructions calmly, directing prisoners into formation. Weiss studies them closely. These men are not thin. Their uniforms are pressed. Their boots are sound. Faces relaxed. Eyes alert, but not desperate. Days settle into routine. Roll calls, work details, meals that arrive on time, every time. Meat, bread, coffee, sometimes something sweet. Weiss waits for it to change, for portions to shrink, for tempers to snap. It does not happen. One afternoon, Weiss is assigned to a work detail near the edge of the training grounds. The sound of rifle fire echoes across the open fields. American soldiers jog past in loose formation, rifles slung casually over their shoulders, laughing as they run. A truck pulls up near the field. Crates are unloaded. Weiss watches as the lid of one crate is lifted. Inside are metal containers packed with ice. An American private reaches in and pulls out something round and pale. Another follows, and another. Ice cream. Weiss stops walking. So do the others. The guards shout for them to keep moving, but Weiss cannot tear his eyes away. The Americans sit in the grass, helmets off, eating ice cream with metal spoons, while a training sergeant shouts instructions nearby. Someone opens a bottle of Coca-Cola. Foam spills onto the dirt. Live fire cracks in the distance. These men are training for combat, and they are eating ice cream. For the first time since Normandy, confusion overwhelms fear. How is this possible? Late August 1944. Camp Ellis, Illinois. The moment should have passed. A curiosity, an oddity to be explained away by circumstance or luck. But it doesn't. Karl Weiss finds himself watching the training grounds whenever his work detail brings him close. Not staring openly, that earns a barked order from the guards, but stealing glances whenever he can. And each time, what he sees reinforces the same unsettling truth. It was not a one-time indulgence. The trucks keep coming. Every morning, like clockwork, supply vehicles roll along the paved roads bordering the camp. Weiss notices details now. The markings on the trucks. The way drivers follow strict intervals, leaving space but never gaps. The fact that engines idle calmly instead of cutting out to save fuel. Fuel, Weiss thinks. Always fuel. Back in Normandy, a single jerrycan could mean the difference between retreat and annihilation. Orders were abandoned because trucks never arrived. Tanks were blown up by their own crews to keep them from falling into enemy hands when fuel ran dry. Here, trucks idle while soldiers eat. Weiss works alongside Unteroffizier Ernst Becker and a former logistics clerk named Hans Kruger. Kruger, thin and sharp-eyed, notices everything. "These are refrigerated trucks," Kruger murmurs one afternoon as they pass a parked vehicle with thick insulation lining its interior. Not improvised, designed. Weiss says nothing. He already knows what that means. They watch as crates are unloaded again. Milk this time. Fresh. Weiss has not seen fresh milk in years. Not since rationing turned it into a pale memory back home. American soldiers drink it straight from metal cups, wiping their mouths with the backs of their hands before jogging back into formation. Training continues relentlessly. Infantry units cycle through obstacle courses, live fire drills, and field exercises. Artillery units practice loading and firing with terrifying speed. Tank crews maneuver across open ground, engines roaring, tracks chewing through soil. And between drills, they rest. They eat. One afternoon, Weiss hears laughter ripple across the field. An American soldier drops his spoon, curses mildly, and another tosses him a spare without hesitation. Spare. The word sticks. That evening in the barracks, the prisoners finally talk openly. "It makes no sense," Becker says, voice low. "They are preparing for war like this?" Kruger nods. "They are not preparing. They are sustaining." Weiss listens as Kruger explains what he sees through the lens of logistics. How refrigeration means long supply chains that don't break. How standardized containers allow rapid distribution. How calories matter as much as bullets. "The soldier who eats well fights longer," Kruger says. "The army that feeds him wins." Weiss lies awake that night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant hum of engines that never seem to stop. Somewhere beyond the camp, trains run through the night. He knows because he hears their whistles, faint but constant. By September, autumn creeps in. The air cools, leaves begin to turn. Weiss expects rationing, seasonal shortages, something. Nothing changes. Meals remain steady. Work details remain organized. Guards rotate without showing strain. Even the camp hospital seems well stocked. Weiss sees wounded American trainees discharged and replaced within days, seamlessly, without drama. One morning, Weiss overhears two American soldiers talking while waiting near a truck. "My brother's already in France," one says. "Mine's in the Pacific," the other replies. "Mom says she's proud. Worries too much." They speak casually, like men discussing weather. No bitterness, no despair. Weiss realizes something then that disturbs him deeply. These men expect to survive. Not all of them, perhaps, but enough. Survival is assumed, not hoped for. In the German army, survival had become an act of defiance against reality. Here, it is part of the system. Later that week, during another work detail near the training field, Weiss sees ice cream again. This time, he forces himself to look closely. The ice does not melt quickly. The containers are insulated properly. The servings are measured, not improvised. This is not luxury. It is planning. A young American private notices Weiss watching and smirks faintly, misunderstanding the look on his face. "Cold enough for you?" the soldier says, gesturing with his spoon. Weiss does not understand the words, but he understands the tone. Friendly, unconcerned. Weiss looks away, heart pounding. Back home, civilians huddled in cellars during air raids, ration cards clenched like lifelines. Children grew thin. Factories worked until bombs reduced them to rubble. Every speech promised sacrifice now for victory later. Here, sacrifice seems unnecessary. The realization settles slowly, painfully. Germany is fighting a war of endurance without endurance. America is fighting a war it is already prepared to finish. That night, Weiss dreams again of his mother's kitchen, of ice cream in glass bowls, of summer afternoons before the war. When he wakes, the sound of a truck passing outside his barracks window greets him. Steady, confident, unstoppable. For the first time since his capture, Weiss does not feel like a prisoner observing his enemy. He feels like a witness to the future. October 1944, Camp Ellis, Illinois. Autumn settles fully over Illinois, not with the brutal suddenness Weiss remembers from the Eastern Front, but gently. Mornings grow cooler. Fog clings to the low ground before burning off under a pale sun. The camp adjusts without effort. Extra blankets appear. Hot drinks are served more frequently. Nothing feels improvised. Carl Weiss has stopped counting days. Time here moves differently, measured in schedules rather than survival. What he counts now are patterns. One afternoon, his work detail is assigned to a rail spur just outside the main camp perimeter. Freight cars roll in slowly, brakes screeching, steel wheels grinding against tracks. Weiss recognizes the markings immediately. U.S. Army Transportation Corps. Everything standardized. Everything numbered. Hans Kruger stands beside him, hands wrapped around a crate hook, eyes narrowed with professional curiosity. "Look at the seals," Kruger murmurs. "Intact. Always intact." They work in silence until a voice breaks through the mechanical rhythm. "Careful with that crate." An American officer steps closer, not angry, not shouting. Captain's bars on his collar. Clean uniform. Clipboard tucked under his arm. "That's dairy," the officer says calmly. "Needs to be unloaded first." Dairy. Weiss glances at Kruger. Kruger's lips tighten. The officer notices their reaction and pauses. For a moment, Weiss thinks he has said something wrong. Instead, the officer exhales softly, as if realizing something. "You fellows from Europe?" he asks. Kruger nods cautiously. "Germany." The officer studies them, not with hostility, but with curiosity. "Logistics?" he asks, nodding toward Kruger's practiced movements. Kruger hesitates, then answers honestly. "Before the war, yes." The officer considers this, then gestures toward the rail cars. "We move about 30 of these through here a day," he says. "Food, fuel, equipment. This is just one camp." He says it like a fact, not a boast. Weiss feels his chest tighten. 30 a day. Back in Normandy, one delayed supply convoy had left an entire battalion immobile. The officer continues, almost conversationally. Most of the men training here will ship out in a few weeks. We want them strong when they go. Strong. The word lands heavily. That evening, Weiss cannot stop thinking about the conversation. He replays it in his mind as he sits on his bunk, listening to the low murmur of voices around him. Some prisoners play cards. Others read books borrowed from the camp library. Another detail that still feels unreal. Library. Becker sits beside Weiss, sharpening a pencil with careful strokes. They talk like the war is already planned, Becker says quietly. Like they know exactly how it ends. Weiss nods. Because they do. A week later, Weiss is assigned to kitchen duty, a rare posting that brings him closer to the source of the abundance he cannot stop thinking about. The mess hall is enormous, its floors scrubbed clean, its air thick with the smell of cooking meat and fresh bread. American cooks move with practiced efficiency. Ingredients arrive pre-measured, pre-packaged, labeled with dates and destinations. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is hoarded. Weiss watches as ice cream containers are stacked in cold storage, logged carefully, rotated to ensure freshness. This is not indulgence. It is management. A cook notices Weiss staring and grins. "You guys ever get this back home?" he asks, scooping ice cream into a container. Weiss shakes his head slowly. The cook frowns, genuinely puzzled. "That's rough." Rough. The word echoes in Weiss's mind long after he is escorted back to the barracks. News filters in through newspapers and guard conversations. Paris liberated. Allied forces advancing steadily. German retreats framed as strategic withdrawals in headlines Weiss recognizes as lies. One afternoon, Weiss sits on a crate near the fence, watching American trainees board trucks. They joke. They smoke. One writes a quick note and hands it to a driver. "Mail it for me," he says. Mail. Weiss thinks of letters lost, undelivered, censored, burned. The trucks pull away, engines roaring, carrying men toward war. Weiss watches until they disappear down the road, replaced almost immediately by another column arriving to train. Replaceable. That night, Weiss finally says the words aloud, voice barely above a whisper. We cannot outlast this. No one argues. For the first time since he put on a uniform, Weiss understands defeat not as failure of courage, but as the inevitable result of arithmetic. Factories, calories, fuel, time. The ice cream, he realizes, is not the point. It is the proof.
November 1944, Camp Ellis, Illinois.
Winter approaches with quiet confidence. The cold does not arrive suddenly, crashing down like it did in Russia or even in Normandy. It seeps in slowly, measured, predictable. And the camp responds before it ever becomes a problem. New coats appear in supply rooms, thicker gloves, wool caps, hot meals served more frequently, coffee poured without limit. Weiss watches the changes unfold and understands something fundamental. The Americans plan for discomfort before it arrives. He thinks of winters past, of frozen rifles and men who no longer felt their feet, of orders issued from warm officers that assumed soldiers could endure anything if commanded loudly enough. Here, endurance is engineered. Weiss is assigned to another logistics work detail, this time unloading crates marked for overseas shipment. The labels catch his attention. Destinations stamped clearly in black ink. ETO, Pacific Theater, Replacement Pool. Each crate is part of a system that does not depend on heroics. It depends on numbers. Hans Kruger works beside him again, his movements steady, methodical. He taps one crate with the back of his hand. Calories, Kruger says softly. This is calories. Weiss nods. Kruger continues, voice barely audible over the sound of shifting cargo. A soldier needs 4,000 a day in combat, more in winter. Multiply that by divisions, by months. Weiss finishes the calculation silently and feels his stomach tighten. Germany does not have those numbers. That afternoon, Weiss overhears a group of American officers discussing schedules near the rail spur. They speak openly, unconcerned with who hears. Next rotation leaves in 2 weeks, one says, fully equipped. Good, another replies. Keeps the pipeline clean. Pipeline. Weiss understands the word in a way he never had before. This war is not a series of battles. It is a flow. Men in, men out. Supplies in constant motion. Losses absorbed without shock. At dusk, Weiss stands near the fence and watches training continue under floodlights. Soldiers practice night maneuvers, shadows stretching across the ground. Trucks idle nearby, headlights dimmed, ready to move when ordered. Even in darkness, nothing stops. In the barracks, conversations change. Early on, men spoke of escape, of return, of the Reich regrouping. Now they speak of timelines, of months, of how long Germany can possibly last. Becker sits on his bunk, boots off, staring at his hands. My brother is still in the army, he says quietly. Somewhere near the Rhine. Weiss does not respond immediately. He knows what Becker is really asking. Your brother is brave, Weiss says finally. But bravery is not enough. The words feel heavy, disloyal, and yet impossible to deny. In December, snow falls over Camp Ellis. It dusts the barracks, softens the roads, muffles sound. Weiss wakes expecting misery. Instead, breakfast is hot, roads are cleared, training continues. On Christmas Day, the Americans decorate their mess hall with simple garlands. Music plays from a radio. Weiss and the other prisoners are allowed to watch from a distance as soldiers gather. Turkey is served, potatoes, bread, and for dessert, ice cream. Again. Weiss watches young men eat and laugh, complaining about cold weather, about missing home, about how their mothers will scold them if they don't write. One soldier looks at his ice cream and shakes his head. They never get the vanilla right, he says. Weiss feels something inside him break. Not in anger, not in despair, but in clarity. This is not arrogance. This is confidence built on certainty. Later that night, Weiss sits alone, staring out a narrow window at the floodlit yard. Trucks move steadily, tires crunching on gravel. Somewhere beyond the horizon, men are fighting and dying. And yet here, the machinery of war hums on, unaffected. Weiss thinks of speeches back home, of promises that victory would come through willpower alone. He thinks of slogans painted on walls, of commanders who spoke of sacrifice as if it were a renewable resource. America, he realizes, does not ask its soldiers to endure scarcity. It removes scarcity from the equation. The ice cream is not indulgence. It is evidence. Evidence of factories untouched by bombs, of farms producing beyond need, of ships crossing oceans unchallenged. Evidence of time on their side. When Weiss lies down to sleep, he no longer dreams of escape. He dreams of numbers, of supply lines stretching across continents, of a war already decided by the simple fact that one side can feed its soldiers desserts while teaching them how to fight. Germany is running out of men. America is training more.
January-February 1945. Camp Ellis, Illinois.
The new year arrives quietly, without speeches or ceremonies the prisoners can see. There is no sense of a turning point marked on a calendar. Instead, the realization settles like frost, slowly, inevitably, until everything is covered. Karl Weiss feels older now, not from hardship, but from understanding. Winter tightens its grip on Illinois. Snow piles against the barracks walls. The wind cuts across the open ground with a sharpness Weiss remembers well from the Eastern Front. Instinctively, he braces for the worst. It never comes. Heating units hum steadily inside the buildings. Windows are sealed. Extra blankets are distributed without request. Boots are dried properly after work details. Even the guards rotate more frequently in the cold, preventing fatigue. Weiss watches it all with the detached clarity of a man who no longer argues with reality. News arrives faster now. Newspapers are more frequent. Guards talk openly. The Battle of the Bulge is over. German forces pushed back. Heavy losses. Retreats no longer disguised with grand language. One afternoon, Weiss sits near the fence with Hans Kruger, watching a convoy of trucks roll past. Each vehicle is identical, each spaced perfectly, each moving at a measured speed. Kruger breaks the silence. "In Germany, we are dismantling factories to keep them from falling intact," he says. Weiss nods slowly. Here, they are expanding them. The thought hangs between them. Work details continue, but the tone among the prisoners has changed. The anger has faded, the resentment dulled. What remains is something heavier, a sober acknowledgement that the war's outcome is no longer in question. Becker receives news in late January, a letter translated by a guard. His brother is missing. Last seen near the Rhine. Becker sits on his bunk long after reading it, staring at the wall. Weiss does not speak. There is nothing left to say that would not feel false. Outside, training continues, even now. Even as the war in Europe grinds toward its end, American soldiers still drill, still run, still fire, still eat. New faces replace those shipped overseas. Fresh uniforms, fresh energy. Weiss watches one group of trainees resting between exercises. Snow clings to their boots. Their breath fogs the air. A supply truck pulls up, tires crunching over ice. Hot food is unloaded. One soldier rubs his hands together and grins. "Nothing like winter field chow," he says. Weiss looks away. He thinks back to 1941, to the early days of the war, when Germany believed speed and shock would compensate for depth, when campaigns were measured in weeks and victory assumed to be permanent. No one planned for years. America did. The realization no longer hurts. It feels almost relieving, like setting down a weight carried too long. Late one evening, Weiss stands near the barracks window, watching floodlights illuminate the camp. Snow drifts slowly through the beams of light. Somewhere nearby, a train horn sounds, long, steady, confident. He understands now that the ice cream was never about comfort. It was about certainty. A nation so sure of its production, so secure in its supply, that it could afford to make war feel normal to the men who would fight it. Germany demanded belief. America delivered proof. When Weiss finally lies down, he does not wonder how the war will end. He wonders only how long it will take. The answer, he knows, depends not on battles yet to be fought, but on factories still running, farms still harvesting, ships still crossing oceans. And they show no sign of stopping.
June 1945. Camp Ellis, Illinois.
Karl Weiss's departure date arrives without ceremony. There is no announcement over loudspeakers, no dramatic farewell. A list is posted. names typed neatly in columns. Weiss finds his own halfway down the page and feels a small, distant tightening in his chest. Not fear, not relief, but the awareness that an experience which reshaped his understanding of the world is about to end. The morning is warm. Summer has settled fully over Illinois now. The air smells of cut grass and dust, and cicadas buzz faintly beyond the perimeter fence. Weiss stands in formation with other prisoners scheduled for transport, a small bag at his feet, his uniform cleaner than it has been since 1941. As they wait, life in the camp continues around them. A training company marches past, boots striking the road in perfect rhythm. An officer walks alongside them, correcting posture, adjusting spacing. None of the soldiers look toward the prisoners, not out of contempt, simply because they have other places to be. A truck rumbles into view near the training field. Weiss recognizes it instantly. Insulated sides, reinforced doors. He does not need to see inside to know what it carries. Ice cream. The soldiers break formation at the command, helmets coming off, rifles stacked. They sit in the grass as they have done countless times before. Metal spoons flash briefly in the sunlight. Laughter rises and falls, unremarkable and unforced. Weiss watches, knowing this will be the last time. Months ago, the sight had filled him with confusion. Later, with dread. Then, with acceptance. Now, it brings clarity. He understands that the ice cream was never an insult, never excess for its own sake. It was not meant to impress prisoners or mock an enemy brought low. It was infrastructure made visible, a demonstration of a system so vast, so resilient, that comfort could coexist with combat preparation. A nation that did not wait for victory to reward its soldiers, but built victory on the assumption that those soldiers would be fed, rested, and replaced. In Germany, Weiss had been taught that war was a test of will, that endurance came from belief, that sacrifice would be answered by destiny. Here, war was treated as an engineering problem. And engineering, Weiss now knows, favors those who plan for reality rather than hope. A guard approaches the departing prisoners, clipboard in hand. He checks names, nods, gestures toward the waiting trucks. "All right, gentlemen," he says evenly. "Let's move." As Weiss bends to lift his bag, he hears a familiar sound behind him. The hiss of a bottle opening, followed by a burst of laughter. Coca-Cola this time. He does not turn around. He steps onto the truck and takes a seat along the wooden bench. The engine starts. The vehicle pulls forward slowly, passing the training field one last time. Through the open slats, Weiss catches a final glimpse of American soldiers finishing their dessert, wiping spoons clean, standing up to return to drills without urgency or complaint. They expect to fight. They expect to be fed. They expect the system to hold. The truck turns onto the road leading away from Camp Ellis. The fences recede. The watchtowers shrink behind him. Ahead lies a long journey back to a defeated homeland that will need to relearn everything about survival. Weiss leans his head back against the wooden slat and closes his eyes. For years, he had believed war was decided by courage, by discipline, by obedience. It took captivity and ice cream to teach him the truth. Wars are won by those who can afford to make them ordinary.